Welcome again, everyone. Welcome to today's sessions, ESG Investing with BPPL. Before diving into the session, I would like to highlight that we will break this session into two. In the session one, we will speak to the management of BPPL to get an understanding about the company and its outlook. Session two, we'll be looking at the Q&A session. Recap. ESG investing has increased substantially since the beginning of COVID pandemic. If you look at the market cap of the ESG, it's currently stands closer to $2 trillion US. And in the first quarter of 2021, this has grew by 20%. If you look at countries like Europe, it saw 150 billion worth of dollar inflow, whereas US and Asia also saw closer to 30 billion worth of funds coming into this sustainable investing. Existing global funds are rebranding as ESG focused. Many companies are rushing to align with this trend. So in this landscape, we will speak to the MD of BPPL to understand how his company is committed to change the VVC, an ordinary bottle, in order to create a more sustainable and clean environment. Welcome to the session, Dr. Anush.
Thank you for having me. Would you like me to just give you a brief first and then you go on to your questions? Or?
Yes, please. Yeah.
Yes, so I think when it comes to any form of business for that matter, ESG as well, for that to sustain, it has to make financial sense. Once you are able to run that business as well as a business, make profits, you can reinvest in that business, and by doing so, you can sustain that. So that's something that we firmly believe in. We also believe a lot in waste, not only plastics, but there are a lot of waste here that can add a lot of value, that you can add a lot of value to, and generate returns, sustainable returns for your investors, for your shareholders. So those are the principles that we started off with, and today, we are lucky to have got to where we've got to, being one of the largest or the largest recycler of plastic waste in Sri Lanka, and then being the only recycled polyester yarn manufacturer in the country. And this is outside our brushware business, our filament business, and so on. I hope that answers your question. So going forward, that's really where we will be going. We'll be focusing more and more on waste collection, and more on value-added products using, the waste that we collect.
Okay, great. Can you please help our audience to get an understanding about the entire supply chain from collection of PET bottles to, producing the final output?
So with the collection of PET bottles, recycling is something relatively new for Sri Lanka. And in order to collect PET bottles or plastic, other forms of plastic in the scale that we require, we had to set up, and we are still in the process of setting up a recycling network, a bottle collection and other forms of waste collection network across the country. And then we are formalizing this collection network by having centralized sites, across the country. Today we have 17 such sites. Our plan over the next 2 to 3 years is to increase that 17 to 40, a minimum of 40 such sites. Those sites in turn have feeders, smaller businesses, individual, businesses feeding waste into those collection centers. And those collection centers would have, baling machines, things to compress the plastic bottles, a building, electricity, some transport, bottle collection bins in that area, which all of that, we would be investing. We have invested and we'll continue to invest. And we are hoping that in the next 2-3 years, as I said, we will have 40 such sites across the country, and feeders into those sites, which will be adequate for us to collect most of the waste that Sri Lanka generates, as in most of the waste when it comes to plastic, when it comes to glass, and when it comes to paper as well. With the glass and paper, what we hope to do is to then supply the glass and paper to those, the glass manufacturers, the carton paper packaging manufacturers. These sites are independent sites. They are for-profit run sites. And for those sites to make a profit, that is where we need to have multiple forms of waste. And that's when we decided to have them collect glass as well as paper, as well as they might go into aluminium as well, apart from the PET. So they are independent organizations, small to medium-sized organizations with feeder services coming into those. And then those bottles, in our case, the PET bottles that are collected, are then transported to our washing plants in Horana, where we have, again, state-of-the-art washing systems where the bottles are, sorted color-wise, and then they are washed, and then we then produce flakes out of these bottles. The clear bottle flakes are produced. There is a different level of washing that one needs to do when it comes to the production of polyester yarn. A lesser quality, when it comes to brush filaments. And these flakes are then transported to our yarn manufacturers, to our brush filament manufacturing plants, and then we produce the filaments there. So today, our filament, when it comes to brush filaments, 1/3 of the brush filaments that we produce, we use ourselves in our brush manufacturing operations. Another 15% or so is used by other brush manufacturers, all exporters in Sri Lanka. And the balance 52% goes to India, goes to Bangladesh. We are one of the largest suppliers of brush filaments into those countries. So I hope that explains that whole process of setting up the whole infrastructure, recycling infrastructure in the country, and then producing, value-added products with that waste.
Okay, thank you. That was useful. And now talking about this plastic wastage, now the governments are taking initiatives to banning the usage of plastic. So in such case, how you are planning to source the material? Do you expect to import the raw materials, or do you still believe that there are enough wastage available in Sri Lanka?
So I don't think as a company, as a BOI approved company, we have the rights to import, these washed bottle flakes. That's part of our agreement. And we have done so, we continue to do so, because there are times where we don't have adequate supply locally. The cost of importing isn't that much more than purchasing locally, probably maybe 10 to 15% more than collecting locally. But the whole story with us and the beauty of what we do is that we collect the bottles, we produce the yarn, then in Sri Lanka, we produce the fabric, and then we produce the garments, which we then export. All this happens within a 100-kilometer space, and that essentially means that you cut down significantly on lead times, you cut down significantly on shipping costs, and you cut down significantly on the carbon footprint. So the beauty of this whole thing is making sure that it all happens within the country. Now, when it comes to the story of banning, again, I don't think that will happen. The indications are, and what senior officials have told us, is that is not the way to go, and correctly, that is not the way to go, because the moment the alternatives are far more expensive. alternative forms of packaging, like glass, for example, is far more expensive. And that essentially would mean that, the rural areas, the urban area, the semi-rural areas, the people in those villages, you're depriving them of being able to enjoy some of the beverages, some of the food that you and I take for granted. They are able to enjoy those types of food, drink, is because the packaging is less expensive. So nowhere in the world is PET banned, but what is done is more and more recycling is encouraged, and that is, I think, the way the Sri Lanka is also going. Obviously, there are non-recyclable plastics like cotton buds, forks and knives, and that sort of thing. Those are being banned, and that again is the right thing, because those are single-use plastics. Banning that is the right thing, and I think, again, as I said, that is the way the government is going forward.
All right. So the key developments we have noted with BPPL is the recent shift towards this synthetic yarn production. Now, I was wondering, whether you have any separate R&D team to focus on, different product initiation. Because if I understand correctly, initially you were focusing on the brushwear segment, and now you are looking at yarn, which is expected to do well. So, can you give some light on this background?
Yeah. So, I mean, all our, most of our R&D we do on the job. We innovate as we go along, be it reducing the costs of production, be it improving the value addition that we do, be it coming up with new products to serve new segments, be it using other forms of waste to do more value addition. Everything happens on the job. And we give the freedom to our engineers and our executives to continue to innovate, and come up with new things. So one of the things that we have done on the brush side is introducing more and more recycled plastic into our brush packs. That's something that we have increased more and more. So on the yarn side, as you know, we use the PET bottles, but we are now innovating, doing dyeing of yarn as part of that yarn production process. Now, when you dye the yarn, when you put in the color pigments into the plastic melt, that then before you draw out the yarn, the color fastness in there is far better, far more superior than the dyed fabric that is a conventional way of doing, where you produce a fabric, then you dye the thing, and then also environmentally it's far less, far worse, because you use a lot of water in that normal traditional way of dyeing fabric and then using that fabric. So in our case, we put in the color pigments into the plastic melt, and we draw out the yarn. Far better environmentally and far better quality wise as well. So that's something new. We are also increasing more and more on the yarn side for into producing thinner yarns. The whole objective and that's the way the industry is going. If you take the apparel industry, you probably know that the growth is really in the polyester segment. Cotton is flat, nylon is flat. Everyone is moving more into athletic wear, leisure wear, outdoor wear, which is all polyester based. And the thing is to make this polyester as close as possible to nylon, which is obviously finer, much thinner, much finer. The feel good for you. On your body, it feels far better. So we are making thinner yarns, even thinner yarns, comparable to nylon, and then, so that those are new areas we are working on. We are working on using other forms of waste. I said one of the areas we are now looking at is using fabric waste. There's a lot of fabric waste that the apparel industry generates, offcuts and so on. We have trialed some of those fabric waste, using that as an alternative to plastic. And we've been successful in making brush filaments out of that. Now our next step is to expand that into using that into producing polyester, yarn fabric as well. And we supply to multiple segments. It's not only to the apparel segment. We are now supplying to the glove segment, the dip products of this world, the Ansels of this world, the Midas, supplying large components into those areas. We are experimenting with the solid tire industry because there's a lot of polyester that goes into a solid tire. Experimenting there in how we can use recycled polyester in those tires. So we are also positioning ourselves in those segments where Sri Lanka has a name, be it solid tires, be it gloves, and obviously apparel.
Okay, great. I think when we spoke to apparel players also, what we understood is Nike is trying to expand their footprint in Sri Lanka. So currently they have roughly around 5% of the market segment, and this is expected to grow to maybe 25 to 30%. And with that, I think your yarn plant can benefit from it. And is it part of the reason why you are expanding your current yarn capacity? Like, I think you are expanding it by closer to 120%.
Yes, so Nike is our biggest customer today. And we supply to all the major brands, Nike being one, Adidas, Decathlon, Asics, PBH, and so on, several parties that we supply to. So we are currently, running, as we're running our first phase, which is the first investment that we did in this area. And that is running at full capacity. Our second phase is coming on stream, will come on stream by April of next year, next financial year. So it will contribute for a full financial year from FY 22-23. But the demand is there. The demand is, Sri Lanka, as imports most of its yarn requirements. Today, Sri Lanka imports around 10,000 tons of polyester yarn, each year. And in our first phase, we are only supplying 6 to 7% of that. So even with this, more than doubling of capacity, we'll be going up to 15-16%. So there's a lot more that we can do, and then we are now looking at a third phase as well. And then looking at how we're planning a third phase as well to come.
Okay, thank you. Now let's talk about the customer profile. So your raw material, yes, a certain part of the raw material you import, but in terms of generating revenue, you are mainly US denominated. So can you give us some light on the customer segmentation, please?
Okay, so yes, 99% of our revenues are US dollar based. But what is interesting here is that we are one of the largest value-added suppliers, exporters in Sri Lanka, because our key raw materials that we use, one is timber, rubber wood, for the brushes, and the second thing is the plastic and the plastic waste. So 50% of our raw materials are sourced from Sri Lanka, 50 to 60%. Large components come from Sri Lanka. And that is how we are able to sort of keep the margins that we keep and add the value that we do. And then in terms of, you were talking about the customer profiles and geographies. So up until last financial year, 90% of our revenues were from North America, US, Canada. Now it's come down to around 70%. Because obviously the yarn is come on stream. Yarn now, so the yarn segment today accounts for around 20% of our revenue. The brush filaments, 10%. Brush filaments to third parties, 10%, and the brush has come down from 90 to 70%. Geography-wise, US, Canada was 70%. It's come down to around 57%. Sri Lanka and India has picked up because of the yarn, because of the monofilaments. Today, Sri Lanka is about 25%, up from 8% last year. And India has gone up about 6 to 7% from around 1 to 2%.
Okay, thanks. So now, do you have any plans to reach out to new clients? Like how you are working on this business model? For example, like the idea I would like to get is like whether any possibilities to expand the dollar-based income, because we have a clear visibility over like the synthetics income generation, but on the other hand, like what we are seeing is in China also, like due to some labor related issues, people, the US brands are moving out from China. So do you see any additional orders coming from your way?
Yeah, so I think two things there. I think the reason that we are not expanding as fast as we would like to is we have to make sure that the supply base is solid and can supply the raw materials to us. So that is why we are setting up this extensive bottle collection network and the sites and so on that I mentioned to you. We hope that will take another maybe 3-4 years to be fully established and then generating the levels of raw material that we need. We don't want to get into being a simple supplier of virgin yarns because we just don't have the economies of scale to do that. It's far cheaper to buy that from India, far cheaper to buy that from China. Sri Lanka's requirements just doesn't justify us setting up a virgin yarn plant. So that's where we need to focus on that value addition and those niche markets.
Okay, great. Let's shift our focus towards some numbers. So when I look at the gross margin of the synthetics plants, I can see it's relatively lower than the brushware segment. Is it due to is it because it's a new projects and you need more time to ramp up the production plant? Can we expect the margin to pick up as we move on?
Absolutely. So you see, with our phase one, all our the management staff, the executives, the people that we have employed to manage that operation would be the same phase two as well. There won't be any increase in management overhead, any increase in that even at the supervisor level. So the only increase when phase two comes on stream would be the direct labor and the direct raw materials. So the phase one hasn't reached scale as yet. It's only with phase two that we will reach scale and we'll be able to, generate those margins that you see with our brush business, for example.
Okay. Another industry trend we are seeing is the elevated freight rates. How is that impacting your business?
Freight rates. Yes, I think so. That is a worry. The good thing for us is that with our yarn operations, it's not affecting us because obviously we supply, to fabric mills in Sri Lanka. But with our brush business, with our monofilament business into India, Bangladesh, that is being affected. We are starting to see slight, more liners now coming on stream. Still very, very early stages, but we are starting to see some reductions in the freight rates. In the month of July, for example, we've had better freight rates than in the month of June. It's still early, but there are good indications that it's starting to move in the right direction, back to where it was a year ago.
Okay. So now you have mentioned about further capacity expansion plan. So in that case, will you be looking at a local LKR denominated loan, or you will be looking at a US denominated loan?
No, it'll be US dollar because obviously we are earning in US dollars. So all our funding will be US dollar based loans. So in this ESG area, as you mentioned, there are lots of funding to come, lots of people looking to fund, large, funding agencies. So we are looking at very long-term loans as well, similar to equity, and we are talking to several of these parties. So we are hopeful that within the next few months, we will have those lines available for our third phase of expansion as well.
Great. Before diving into this Q&A session, so my final question is, from here, like from 5 years from here, how do you see BPPL operating? So like in terms of key customer segments or like business segments, how do you see it's going to operate?
I think what will limit us from growing even further beyond the third phase and possibly a fourth phase will be the availability of raw materials, will be the availability of lack of, waste plastic. I mean, it's a nice thought, you get rid of most of your waste plastic in the country. But if it means that then we would have to import more, we have to think about that. But the nice thing, the way I see us growing in 5 years' time is taking this model that we have here of bottle collection networks, washing plants, yarn manufacturing to other countries that have similar apparel manufacturing hubs, like Egypt, like Turkey, like some of the African regions. The same model can be replicated there. Those countries have apparel industries, they have plastic problems. So what we have done here can easily go into those countries, and those are far bigger markets. So expansion opportunities are far greater there. What we also do is, this thing of using the bottle flake and producing yarn directly is something very unique. This is the only plant of its kind in the world that does that. There's another plant that does carpet manufacturing in Uzbekistan, but no one produces textile fabrics with flakes directly into yarn. And this has all been possible because of our engineers, because of their know-how. True, we have had good German technology, good German machinery, but being the only plant of its kind in the world, there was a lot of input that our engineers had to give in as well. So it's something very unique that we have done. When it comes to bottle to flake to yarn directly, that means that you reduce your energy cost significantly compared to conventional flake to pellet to yarn factories. And because of that, obviously, you have far better profit margins.
Just to follow up on that, do you see any like new players entering into the market? Because now ESG is emerging in this, after the pandemic. So as a result of that, many players can enter into this business segment. So do you see it as a threat, or do you own any patent to like eliminate a new entrance into this market?
But it's not so much patent, it's really know-how that our engineers have, and among several of those engineers. So that's one thing that we have going for us. The second thing really is that bottle collection network that we have. So anyone coming in, would have to set up a bottle collection network themselves, and that's a good 3-4 year, 5 year, program. So in Sri Lanka, I can't see that happening.
Okay. So I will move on to the questions. Client is asking, how do you see raw material prices increasing in next few quarters? So
our problem has been not so much if it comes to if you take the timber and the plastic, the PET, not so much those prices going up because of there is adequate supply, but the problem really has been the COVID, the lockdowns and not being able to go out there and collect these things, and also most of our suppliers being affected by the Delta currently, the Delta variant. So that has meant that some of those raw materials have had to be imported, and in larger scale than what we would like to import. So our margins have been under pressure in the current quarter because of having to import those raw materials until we can then get our supplies back up again, and then hopefully that will happen post this whole Delta situation in the country.
Okay, so if things are get back to normal, you are trying to say that we have enough supply locally
Yes, I mean, if you could, I mean, timber, yes, we have, because, the rubber plantations and all those rubber trees, every 25 years, they are supposed to uproot and replant. When it comes to PET, Sri Lanka imports, roughly 15,000 tons of this each month. Customs data, 15,000 15,000 each year. And we recycle only around 3,000 tons of that, roughly 20%, 15 to 20%. So there's a lot more that we can do. There's a lot more plastic that's available out there that we can get once we set up these collection networks.
Okay. So he asked another follow-up questions on whether you can pass any cost escalation to your clients.
We can, but see, the thing is, the moment you pass on, when you're in this export industry, the moment you pass on cost increases, they look elsewhere. However loyal a customer is to you, anything, anything reasonable, obviously they'll accept, but anything more than, 3%, they look elsewhere, because they run a business themselves. So what we prefer to do is to manage the costs ourselves, and if there is a falling rupee, obviously that helps us to manage the costs as well.
Okay. So there's another questions asking about this higher freight cost, and he asked whether you are looking at any alternate options. Are there any solution for this?
Unfortunately, not. You have to ship. I mean, obviously, air freight is far more expensive, so we have to depend on the shipping liners, and unfortunately, not. I mean, being an island nation, there is no other option.
Okay. So another question is about how would the overall recycling of aluminium works, and if you can explain.
Yeah, so that's something that we don't know. As I said, that's not something that we would do, but our collection networks and centers would collect aluminium as well and pass it on to some of the beer companies, beer manufacturers, and then see whether they can use that.
Mm-hmm. There's another questions about the funding. What is the benefit of getting the funding in USD compared to LKR?
Far lower interest rates and far longer tenors. So, we in Sri Lanka, in rupee terms, in dollar terms, some of I mentioned to you some of the funding agencies that we are talking to, we are looking at 10, 12-year long tenors at fixed US dollar rates. That sort of, and those low fixed rates, it's very difficult to get those in Sri Lankan rupees.
So now we talked about this ESG at the beginning, and that is an emerging theme, and you are working in that space. So when you speak to customers, how excited they are about this new theme, and how do you see this evolving going forward?
Because very excited. I mean, you see, if you go into some of the promotions that we have done, we will do. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we haven't been able to do. But some of these brands, that we work with, they run these stories at various sports events. For example, we had this program going with the Hypermoney Group and ASICS through them, where they sponsored the European marathons, all the city marathons. And they were going to run our stories at all those cities at the end of the race, showing how the bottles are collected, showing how the yarn, fabric, and the apparel is manufactured, all within this 100-kilometer space. So massive buy-in for things like that. We don't know of anyone in the world that is a recycler and is a yarn producer as well. So you have the recyclers and then you have the yarn producers. But and to do it at the scale that we do, we don't know of anyone in the world that does that.
Okay. There's another question from a client. He's asking whether you have any plans to expand to different countries.
Yes. So as I said, beyond the third phase and possibly a fourth phase in Sri Lanka, the raw materials would be a constraint for us within Sri Lanka, and then we would have to look elsewhere. And then obviously those markets would be far bigger for us as well, far more scalable opportunities in those countries.
Okay. There's another question asking about the pricing comparison between regular high quality yarn and the recycled product of BPPL.
Recycled yarn is identical to virgin yarn, if not better, because no consumer will go out there and buy a recycled t-shirt if it's of an inferior quality, or most wouldn't, inferior quality compared to a virgin t-shirt. So it has to be the best. It has to look the same. It has to feel the same. It has to be identical, if not better. So the challenges we have is taking this, bottle waste, dirty bottle waste, and producing something which is identical to a virgin yarn.
I think that's it from the audience. Thank you very much, Dr. Anush, for speaking to us, because I think we are very delighted to hear from you, because you are one of the unique business model in Sri Lanka, which is converting wastage into a final output. I hope our audience also found it very useful, because ESG is one of the emerging theme since the pandemic. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I hope that was useful.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.